Hello, my name is Nancy, and today we are going to do a project called Imagine Worlds out of recycled materials. But before we begin, there's two things that I want to tell you. The first is that you may hear some little birds in the background. If you do, those are my little chickens that I'm raising that I will take outside in a couple weeks and will eventually give me some eggs. The other thing I want to share with you is a little bit about me and my work as an artist. I use pretty much all recycled materials, things that I find in the garbage or in the recycling container, or even that I pick up out in nature. And the reason I do that is because I really care about our environment and I want to create less waste that goes into the landfill. And I want to help conserve the resources that create the things that we have around us. And so what better way to do that than to make art? And so I'm going to share with you a sample that I created for our project today that also actually includes one of my sculptures. So I create I call them sculptures, but they actually look like clothing and are made out of trash. So let's look at a little picture of one. So here is my diorama, and in the front or the foreground, you'll see a dress, and that dress is made out of plastic bags. And I'm going to show you a picture of that in a minute, and so you'll be able to see it better. But meanwhile, let me just tell you a little bit about my diorama because it actually tells the story of this dress. So it's called the Jellyfish Dress, and it's made out of plastic bags. Now, in the background of my diorama, you'll see a turtle swimming around looking at a plastic bag, and it's about to eat it. And that plastic bag looks like the turtle's favorite food, which are jellyfish. And so the problem is that when we litter plastic, it ends up in our waterways and often in the ocean. And marine life thinks that it's food and eats it, and they get very sick, and sometimes they even die. And so that's one of the reasons that it's really important not to litter. And that is the message of the Jellyfish Dress. So let's talk about our project. I keep using the word diorama, and you might be wondering what that is. Basically, a diorama is a little scene that is three-dimensional. So a two-dimensional piece of art is something like a drawing or painting that is flat against the wall. A three-dimensional piece of art is like a sculpture. It's something that you can walk around and see all sides of it. So this diorama is three-dimensional because it has depth. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that idea of depth in a minute. And so this diorama is obviously of an ocean, and you can see my background is the ocean, and then on the floor I have kind of shells, and there's a little sand in the front. So let's look at some pictures here before we begin. And first of all, I promised you I was going to show you a better picture of the jellyfish dress. And here it is. And so as I mentioned, it's made out of plastic bags. And I took those bags and I manipulated them in lots of ways. I cut them and I scrunched them and I pulled them. And my goal was really to capture the essence of a jellyfish. Now I'm going to show you photos of sample dioramas that were made by other kids. I work as a teaching artist in the schools, and so these are samples of projects I've done with other children. And we're going to look at a couple different things that you need to think about when you make your diorama. The first thing I want to talk about is the position of your box. So when you look at the box that has the people in it, you'll notice that you're looking straight on into the box, just like with mine. But the other picture is kind of like you took the lid or the ceiling off of a room and you're looking down into the box. So that's one of the first decisions you're going to make. Are you going to look down into your scene, or are you going to be looking at it basically straight on? I mentioned before the idea of depth, and let's talk about that in a little detail. The picture that has the people in it, you'll notice that there's a river that runs from the foreground to the background. The foreground is the front of the box, the background is the back. And so there's some little waves in the front, and then there's some people running over a bridge, and then there's some trees, and then there's the clouds in the sky and the sun. So there's actually 4 levels of depth going back to front. Now the other picture of the ocean, you'll see that almost like half of the box is from top to bottom is the waves of the ocean, and then there's the boat, and then there's the sun. So as you're making your diorama, I want you to think about depth in terms of back to front and from top to bottom. Now in this slide, I want to talk about the properties of the materials that you're using. So in the picture where there's a little table that has some bowls on it, you'll see that the student artist used some cardboard that came from a cereal box. And so that really had the structural integrity to hold those little bowls. Can you imagine if instead of that cereal box, they used a newspaper? Like, that's a really thin piece of paper, and so it would have collapsed under the weight of those little bowls, quote unquote. And one of the things that I love is that they use the bowl reminded them, or those are caps actually, to bottles, and that reminded them of a little bowl. And then they put things in it, and I love how the yarn kind of looked like spaghetti or noodles. And so they were using the properties of that material to create what was in their mind. Now, the other picture, we're going to look at this picture a couple times, but the thing I want to focus on in this slide is how that blue netting in the foreground looks like water. Like, that net is a little bit transparent and it has kind of some movement, so it has that feeling of water in it. So you're going to want to think about the properties of the materials that you're working with and how they are going to help you get the ideas across that you have about your scene. In this slide, I want to talk about images. And in the picture with the hills and the river in it, you'll notice that this student artist painted and drew everything in there. Whereas in the other picture, that artist cut out from magazines or catalogs or junk mail the pictures of the animals and then that little scene outside. And I have to say, I love how they drew a little window around that scene. So it really feels like you are in a room looking outside. So you're going to make some choices about your backdrop and what's in the scene. Do you want to draw and paint them yourselves, or do you want to cut them out? And once you've finished your diorama, you can do some additional things like add text if you want. And that could be as simple as just writing one word like forest. Or in the other slide, you can see how this artist created this whole story about what is happening in this scene, including giving the characters in the scene some little text bubbles that allows them to have a conversation back and forth. So that's something that you can think about doing as well. Okay, let's talk now about the steps in creating your diorama. So the first thing that you are going to want to do is make sure that you have your base materials. And so you're going to need to have a shoe box or some kind of a little box that is about the size of a shoe box. And then you could cut off the flaps. Or maybe there's a way that you are wanting to incorporate the flaps of the box into the seam. That's your decision as an artist. So you're going to need the box, and you're going to need some scissors, and you're going to need some glue and some tape. Those are the things you're going to need for sure. But then there's going to be all kinds of other items that will depend upon your scene. So your first step is going to be to decide what is the scene. Is it going to be a forest, an ocean, the moon, outer space? Like, this is why this project is called Imagined Worlds, because it's whatever you can come up with in your mind. So once you've decided what the scene is, then I want you to think about, who are the characters? Are they people? Are they animals? Who are the characters? And then are there things in there? Is there a spaceship, a bridge, whatever you want? Okay, so once you've decided the scene, the characters, the things, then you get to go on a little materials hunt. And you're looking for what are the exact things that are going to help you make your scene. And this is where you're also thinking about the properties of the materials that you're going to use. So now you know what you're going to make, you have your materials, and so the first step is going to be to make the backdrop. And let's look at my sample again. So the first thing I did was I created that ocean in the back, and I think you can probably see why. Like, if I had put the turtle on first, it would be really difficult to get in there and put the backdrop on. Same thing if I had put the jellyfish dress on there first, it would be difficult to maneuver around it. So that's why you want to put on the background and then the floor as well. And when you're doing that, I encourage you to cover all of the surfaces. So don't leave any cardboard showing, so that when you look at your imagined world, you just kind of, like, there's nothing distracting you from it. It's just all your world. The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to, after you have your backdrop on securely, and you can use, I would use the glue for that, then you can start to put in all of your characters and your things. Now, I want to give you a couple of tips about that. So the first thing, you might be wondering, how is the jellyfish dress standing up? So I'm going to turn this around and show you. I use a technique, I call it an L, making an L. So can you see how there's like a little tab on the bottom of the jellyfish? So it essentially like makes an L like that. So I fold the bottom down, and then that's what I glue. I glue the bottom of the L down. Now, I printed a picture of the jellyfish dress on some paper, and I found that the paper was a little bit flimsy. Remember, we were talking about the properties of the materials? So I made a little brace. You can see I kind of gave it like a little backbone right here. And so that was a piece of cereal box that that I cut into an L and glued it against the dress so that it would help it to stand up. Now, another fun thing that you can do is, we're talking about the depth from the bottom to the top, is you can hang things that either float in the ocean or fly through the air, as I did. And so to do that, I took a little bit of thread and then some tape, and I taped it, or you could glue the thread, tape or gluing it to the item itself, and then I just taped it. Can you see that? I taped it to the top. So I think that that is pretty much what you need to know to make your diorama. And so I hope that you have a lot of fun on this project, and that you're able to use the recycled materials that you find around your house.